Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a great show today. You know, we always talk about cybersecurity on the show, and it's so important. We've been able to bring some real experts on the show to talk about different types of cybersecurity protocols and penetration testing. And we've been able to bring a real worldwide leading expert on the show today. I'm so excited to bring Mr. Seemant Sehgal on the show, and he is the CEO and founder of BreachLock. And they have a very unique program, a very unique full stack penetration testing protocol, and they do it as a full service solution. I mean, it's real interesting what Seemant and his team has put together. They use AI to help scale human pen testers. And when it comes to cybersecurity, Seemant's a worldwide leading expert. I'm so happy to have him on the show. Seemant, welcome to the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you, Andy. Happy to be here.
Seemant, it's absolutely great and an honor to have you on the show today. Let's do what we always do. Let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet. Tell us about what you're doing at BreachLock, and then we're going to get into it.
Absolutely. So BreachLock is basically focusing on the pen testing space, like you said, right? So let's break down that word a little bit. What does it really mean to a common man? So you hear in the news, you read it all the time, companies get hacked. And, you know, the other side of the coin is there are a ton of investments that all the big banks, you know, all the big corporations are putting in cybersecurity. So, you know, as a common person, you might be thinking, hey, if they're spending all that money, you know, why is that such a big problem after that, right? Well, the reason for that is that it's one thing to invest in your defenses, and it's another thing to find out if they're working or not, right? Now, if you take that example in a real world war scenario, you've got these armies doing, you know, drills, right? To practice how their defenses would work or not if a real situation, you know, hits them. Now, that's exactly what pen testing is in the cybersecurity world, right? So if you put your defenses in place, if you develop a product, you know, you can't just have hope as a good strategy, you know, that it'll work when the time comes. So you have to test it. And that process in itself is what is called pen testing. And what BreachLock really does is that we are disrupting this space, because traditionally this has been a human-centric process only. And when I was spending, you know, a lot of time in this problem, I've spent a lot of dollars buying from the other side of the table when I was working with some of the largest banks in the world. And, you know, I said, wait a minute, you know, this is a technology problem, and we're still doing it the 1980s way, as if this was an accountant or a lawyer that I'm hiring, right? So that's where the story of BreachLock came in. We took the technology first approach. We put some artificial intelligence elements into it. And really what we did is that we took out the repetitive tasks that a pen tester would do normally in a boutique pen testing, or even a big four for that matter, right? So put it very literally, what we do is that we've created here an Iron Man suit, right, for our pen testers. And once they put it on, in terms of the BreachLock platform, you know, they're scaling new heights and they're able to do a lot more. And in return, our clients are getting the value that they deserve. So which means they can get their products out there faster. And hopefully at some point in time, we'll be able to achieve our mission, which is, you know, making cyberspace a safer place.
That's great, Seemant. Of course, everybody's starting to reach out to you. You know, you started with the smaller businesses. Now you're working with enterprise companies. What types of companies right now are reaching out to you at BreachLock? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about who you're helping and why BreachLock is resonating so much for so many companies.
Right. And I know a lot of your audience is basically CEOs and founders, or, you know, budding CEOs and founders. So I want to be careful in terms of how I answer that question, because the reality today is not what the reality was, let's say, 3.5 years back when we started, right? So I'll take it also from a journey perspective. So when we started in 2019, the only people that were, interested in talking to us were really the startups in California and New York region, right? So whenever you start, you have to start there, you know, with the SMB segment. But as we grew along and our thought leadership really came out up in the front of, as they say, on the number one page of cybersecurity, it became more and more evident that enterprise clients were also interested now to talk to us, right? So if you look at where we are today, in 2022, it's mainly large enterprises that are dealing with volumes of pen testing requests that are coming from different product owners. That's the main use case that we solve now, but this wasn't the case when we started.
Yeah, that's interesting, Seemant. Of course, you started with the small to mid-sized companies. Now you're working with the enterprise companies. When we think about it, you put out sort of this first generation, this minimal viable product. It sort of caught fire, and now you're working with the big companies. For the entrepreneurs watching the show, Seemant, let's talk about it, because there has to be a difference between working with the small companies early on with the enterprise companies right now. So what's the difference between working with those two types of companies from BreachLock's perspective?
Yeah, so it's quite a different ball game, right? And mainly so in terms of the differences, when the SMBs, or let's say the startups or the scale-ups come to you, they come to you with a very specific use case, right? Which is very fine-tuned to what they need in terms of the problem that they have in their head, right? And with the enterprises, it's the other side of the coin. Sometimes you get into a discussion to even define what the real problem is, because there are so many dimensions to it. The other big difference, Andy, I would say, is in the way you manage the stakeholders for an enterprise, right? So, in year one, I remember I did close to 300 deals myself, being the founder salesman. And mostly that was very easy, and it went so quick is because, I've been close to the C-suite in a very large bank. So mostly I would speak to these CIOs, CISOs, and CTOs of startups and scale-ups. And it would be an easy decision to make, right? Because we were talking the same language and the decisions could be made much faster. However, in the enterprise play, it's quite different, right? Because you've got multiple stakeholders. So if you look at the sales funnel there, you start with the gatekeeper, you get to the influencer, and then somewhere down the line, you could be sure that, when it's time to hit the signature, you will meet the budget holder, right? But it's a longer process. So obviously, it takes a different approach to address the enterprise market. And it also takes a different skill set. So the people that we put into the process with the enterprise, whether it's from the actual product execution standpoint or the sales cycle standpoint, it's completely a different ballgame. It's never the same. And I would say that's also not the right idea to have the same people do both sides of the coin.
That's awesome, Seemant. I mean, for the people watching the show, Seemant just gave you what I would call a mini Harvard MBA. I mean, it's so interesting with regard to the journey. And of course, one thing that really is impressive, one thing that, Seemant, you've been able to do at BreachLock is you've put together what I call a world-class team. I mean, you've got the who's who on the roster of people that understand scaling, they understand full stack penetration, they understand cybersecurity. Let's talk about the team. How important is the team to the growth at BreachLock?
I think it's a great question, right? And it's a very straight answer. That's the only thing that's important, right? And in fact, if you ask me, a lot of people ask me, where's most of my time going, apart from the first year, which was really an exception where, I was doing right from, mails to phone calls to, picking up parcels. So as a founder in the first year, of course, you have to wear many hats. I'm sure you've heard that before. But after a point where it really gets to is that it's all about the team that you pick to do the job, right? So that's also where a lot of my time goes right now. And it's a really important piece in our strategy, Andy, and we talk about it all the time here at the leadership team because, we define the values that we look for in the individuals that we interview. And it's very hard to get through the roof at BreachLock. And it doesn't mean that the people that we interview, they're not great people. They obviously are, but they're probably great elsewhere. So we put them through the lens of our values really in the beginning. And we also have a saying in BreachLock that hope is not a good strategy when it comes to HR, which means that during the interaction, if you already have a sense that it's not a good fit, we drop the ball on it. On the other hand, like you said, we've got the who's who of cybersecurity on our side. Some of these executive hires that we have, we've been working on this relationship for years. People think that it's easy to build a team. You just put out a JD, it goes on to Indeed.com or Monster Board, and there you are. You get the people. No, that it doesn't work that way with an executive team, because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it, and especially in terms of building the relationship. And some of the hires that I've had, I've been speaking to them for like 1.5, sometimes even 2 years before they stepped into BreachLock. And the question pops in much later in the conversation. Somewhere between 6 months and 12 months is where you drop the ball, say, hey, how about pursuing a startup life at BreachLock? Are you bored at the corporate that you're working at? Right. So that's how it is.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Seemant. Of course, you mentioned the values, and you mentioned, of course, that's so important when you hire on your team. And for the younger entrepreneurs watching the show, Seemant, they may be saying to themselves, well, what is the single most important value when you hire? What is sort of the single most important overriding thing that you want for someone to have in terms of their value when they join BreachLock?
Absolutely. So I think there are two things, Andy, that we look for. And one of them is definitely hunger, right? So at BreachLock, we've got a bunch of hungry people. That it doesn't mean to say that they have not accomplished, everything that a lot of people might aspire to accomplish at the stage of the life that they are. They're already very accomplished people, but they're still very hungry for more, right? For doing better, for doing good to the society, even in some cases, right? And so that's one thing that we look for. If you're really missing something, and if the answer to that is excitement, then we always say that BreachLock is the place for you to be. The second thing that we look at candidates, and that's across the board, right from executives to, let's say, even an intern that would step in, is that once we have established that you're hungry, then we also want to see that your mouth is where your money is. Which means if you're telling me you're very passionate about cybersecurity, even though you're a student and you've been wanting to get into this and you aren't able to explain it to me in terms of what you've studied or what you've captured in terms of the knowledge, because knowledge today is really free, right? And I always ask the candidates, hey, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you know? And that is the bit that we then delve down deeper into. And if you cannot demonstrate that your passion is for real, then that's a no-go for BreachLock.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And of course, you mentioned you want to do good, and the people at your team, you want them to want to do good as well. And of course, if we look at your career, you've always believed in giving back. You've always believed in doing good. You've always believed in making society better. Let's talk about that. Where did that passion that you have about giving back and doing good and giving back to society come from?
Right. Oh, that goes really deep. And, it's basically the value system that I grew up with. And in fact, that was the only thing that made sense to me. What you have more, you need to share. Right. And you have more for a reason, right? Because the other side of the spectrum is that not everybody's born with the same level of opportunity like most of us do, right? So at my heart, I'm a capitalist, but somewhere down below, I also know and realize that not everybody has the same shot at the opportunities in terms of, where we are born and where we get to and what circumstances and what mentors, for example, we get exposed to, right? So there's a lot that needs to be determined elsewhere and not just based on the hustle that you're able to put in, right? So those values were basically inculcated into me when I was growing up, all thanks to the surroundings and my parents. And I think over time, I realized the more you pay it forward, the more it comes back to you, right? Because in the end, it's all about feeling good. And to be honest, it's a very, people think and project it in a way as this is a great way of living. But if you really ask me deep down below, I think it's a very selfish way of living, because in the end, we're all living to be happy. And if paying it forward makes me happy, then that's the way I want to live, right? And that's the philosophy I just get on with in life. So far, it's worked.
Seemant, that's great. I love it so much. And of course, I can't wait to bring you back on the show, because we want to unpack all of that sort of doing good for the community in a much more deep way. But for now, I want to get a little geeky. I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship with you in just a little bit to give back to the entrepreneurial community. But you have this full stack penetration testing as a service solution. It's such a great idea. I love it so much. I know it came from when you were at the bank, but let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. How did you come up with that full idea? Because it's just fantastic.
So for me, that was almost a no-brainer. When I was working at this big bank, I was spending a lot of budget on buying this from Big Fours and the likes. You name it, I had it in terms of a vendor. And then what struck me was that once somebody wanted to get a security test done, essentially there was so much of overhead involved in just getting the stuff to get it started, right? There was so much that was going into it, and on both sides, meaning the consumer as well as the provider. And it didn't make any sense to me, right? To give you an example, speaking to one of the CISOs, they asked me that, and this was back in 2019, so COVID did not hit by then, right? So this was still a real question. You'll know it when I say it. So they said to me, okay, fine. Is that remote? We said, yes, it's remote. It's all SaaS. He said, yeah, but that's not what I'm used to, because I had this other Big Four send their consultants to me in-house. And, that's how we did the hack. And that's how we knew how secure we were. So, it really doesn't sound like a good plan to me that you're going to do it all remote. And then I just stopped for a minute, looked them in the eye, and I said, hey, what was the last time you invited a real hacker onto your office premises and from a different continent? Again, I don't want to name, any countries here, but, if you look at the cyber data, it will be pretty clear where most of the threats are, especially with the war situation now, where they're coming from. And that struck onto that CISO and said, wait a minute, you're right. Then I showed him these 10 lost cyber incidents where in all of those 10, the hacks were done even from another continent, not just from another country, from another continent, right? And that got us that deal, of course, right? So that is where the concept of pen testing as a service comes from, which is more like SaaS, software as a service. And the idea behind this was that, why is it so difficult to order a pen test? Why is there so much of an overhead? Why can't we just get onto a website? If I'm a SaaS player, why can't I just choose a package and hit the word, go, and then I should be getting on with the process? Now, there are complexity to this, right? There is a complexity, because by the end of the day, it's a complex job and you wanted to give it to a trusted party, right? So you can't just click, and go next. That would become an automated play. And that's why we've continued to be a hybrid player in the market, which means, yes, we do use AI, like, the Iron Man suit, but inside is a real human being with the human creativity of being a top-class hacker, right? So that's really the pen testing as a service piece, because it's continuous in nature, and you can just have it by making a simple request, a 3-stage process that you go through, and by the end of that process, you know exactly where you stand from a security posture perspective, and that too from a hacker's viewpoint.
Yes, Seemant, that makes so much sense. Of course, the hybrid model is just perfect. People love it. They're talking about it. The word's getting out in a big way, especially in the enterprise companies. Of course, you've got the Iron Man suit. I love that analogy so much. One thing that you are known for is mentorship as well. I mean, you're a great mentor. You've had some great mentors. And that's one of the reasons why we're so excited to have you on the show. I wanted to get back to the entrepreneurial community right now. So, we have some younger entrepreneurs watching the show. Maybe they're hitting a roadblock. Maybe they're hitting a pothole in the road. Maybe they hit a wall they can't get through. So, Seemant, let's talk about it. What advice can you give to the younger entrepreneurs watching the show about how to get through a tough time and how to get through a roadblock in their entrepreneurial journey?
Right. So I think everything that you want to do in terms of something that's spectacular, it requires preparation, right? And a lot of the preparation is in your head, because if you want to be an entrepreneur, one skill that you need to have is to be able to think clearly, right? Because obviously you're getting into a leadership role. When you have a leadership role, you've got a responsibility of more people than yourself. And one thing that you want to get right is give clear directions, right? Otherwise, you're not really a leader, right? So I think thinking with clarity is where it all begins. And that really starts not just with the problem. And, I also do a lot of investing as an angel investor now, myself, my private holding. And one thing I tell all the entrepreneurs, and this is where I see things going wrong, is that, the founders fall in love with the problem. And they just focus on the problem and they talk about the problem, and which is good. I mean, because that's where it all starts. But what you should also then think of is the other side of the coin, which is your customer. Who's going to buy it at the end? How big is the market? Why are they going to pay me a single dollar for what value I'm able to transfer to them, right? And who else in this market is offering that? And the last but not the least, if there are other players in the market, that's always a good sign. So that's also a myth. A lot of people will tell you that you need to be simply unique and come up with an idea that nobody else has ever thought of. To my mind, in my old school of entrepreneurship, because I'm a self-taught entrepreneur, what I've seen is, if the idea is too unique, that's in fact a problem, because then you have to start creating clients and not creating a solution, right? And probably if it's your first stint, that's not really the best idea to pursue. But in the end, it's really important to think about your client and not just focus on your problem, because when you think about the client, you kind of do the course correction as you go. And if you keep following the client and the value that your client is looking for, you automatically know what the target market is, where your clients are, what their personas are, the language that they speak and what they want to hear. And that, by the end of the day, is going to get you to that holy grail stage, which a lot of startups, die before they reach there. And it's called the product market fit, right? So focus on the problem, but also look at the client. And somewhere in that journey of course correction, you'll find your product market.
Seemant, that makes all the sense in the world. What a great analysis. I mean, I love it. Thinking with clarity. I mean, I can see that being a TED talk that you're going to give, or maybe when you write your next book, it's going to be called Thinking with Clarity. It makes all the sense in the world. Let's talk about it, because great entrepreneurs must give clear directions. You just said that, and it's really, really solid. I mean, I haven't heard that from an entrepreneur in a long time, but that really makes sense. What happens when an entrepreneur or a CEO does not give clear directions? What happens to the company when they have a founder or CEO that gives unclear directions versus clear directions?
I think it's really a clear case where the founder or the leader is not doing their homework, right? Because if you're coming into a meeting and you don't know where the meeting is going and where the discussion needs to go, then there's a problem. And the problem is that you didn't do your homework, right? And a lot of people also mix that up with you being a leader that's not able to take a lot of advice that's on the table. But that's a mix-up, right? Because that's step 2 of the process. The step 1 is you need to be able to define what the scope of discussion is, right? And what really is it that you're trying to solve there. And maybe the leader's opinion comes a lot later, but if the direction is not clear, then guess what? The discussion is going to be all over the place. And one thing that startups don't have, and that big enterprises have, is time. The startups are running against time. There's a time clock. You need to get to the solution faster and in the most accurate way possible. And you need to be ready to fail, right? So with leaders or founders that are not yet clear in their own head what the direction of the company is going to be, or the product is going to be, or your go-to-market strategy is going to be, I don't think it's the right place to start. You should go back to the whiteboard, do your homework, and come back to your team.
Seemant, that is awesome. Great advice. I mean, I love the analogy of the Iron Man suit again. And of course, you're in the middle of what I think is the single most important space. I mean, it's so important with regard to enterprise clients as well as small to mid-sized companies, of course, to have cybersecurity in a way that's powerful. I mean, your full stack penetration testing as a service solution is remarkable. You're using AI to help scale human pen testers. I mean, your professional acumen and your personal entrepreneurial journey is absolutely remarkable. It makes all the sense in the world. I mean, you're mentoring people, you're telling people to think clearly, you're giving clear directions. I mean, this has been a great interview, Seemant. Thank you so much for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today and telling us about BreachLock and your entrepreneurial journey.
It's a pleasure, Andy. Thank you for having me.